After you've recorded and edited your podcast and you've converted it to an MP3, which we'll look at how to do shortly, your work still isn't quite done. Yes, you could post your MP3 online for people to download, but unless they can subscribe to your show instead of visiting your website or blog or Facebook page themselves to see if you've added a new episode, it's not technically a podcast. In this video, I want to give you a brief overview of the steps you'll go through to publish your podcast. So let's start by talking about the elements that make up your podcast. The first thing you'll need is your media file. Most commonly, your audio podcast is going to be in the MP3 format. It's still the most commonly used format for audio files. You can use other formats as well, like WAV files, but the point is, before you can publish a podcast, you obviously need something to publish. For now, we'll continue to assume that we're using an MP3. Next, you'll need to find a hosting service for your media file. You need someplace on the internet to store your files so anyone connected to the internet can download them at any time on demand. Now, your hosting service can be used just to host your media file, or you may want to find a host that also gives you space for a website. It isn't absolutely necessary to have a website for your podcast, but a website is a great way to promote your show and to communicate with your listeners. And it can also provide information about your show and your individual episodes. So I do recommend creating a website to accompany your podcast. And then you need something called an RSS feed. Depending on who you talk to, RSS stands for Rich Site Summary, RDF Site Summary, or really simple syndication. The point, though, is that RSS is the technology that allows users to subscribe to websites that provide feeds. For example, lots of news sites provide RSS feeds, so their users can read just the headlines without having to wait for pictures to load or stare at the ads. The RSS feed is simply a text file that contains all the information for your podcast and allows users to subscribe to your show with podcast software. You can create your RSS file by hand if you know XML, but there are some nice time-saving alternatives to that out there that'll do it for you automatically, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And of course, you'll want to publicize and promote your RSS feed address so people will be able to subscribe to it. That includes registering your podcast with services like iTunes and other podcast directories, so it'll show up in listings or results when people are browsing or searching for podcasts to listen to. That way, anyone who wants to find it will be able to subscribe to it from their preferred podcast software without having to know the actual address. And you'll also have to update your feed each time you publish a new episode. And you'll, of course, want to promote new episodes on your website and social media outlets. So these are the steps you'll need to put together to have a real honest-to-goodness podcast. You've got to create the media file, store the media file online, create your RSS feed, and then you should go through the process of publicizing the feed and updating it whenever you have new episodes out. But that's really it. It really doesn't look that bad, right? So next, let's start with the first step and export our podcast out of GarageBand as an MP3.